Well, hello, Nativity Bible heads. It is Dr. Wayne, and it is time for Bible Study Wednesday. We are getting away from 2 Kings tonight. Why? Because we have come to that point in the book of 2 Kings where there are prophets that have their own books named after them, dealing with the same time period that our Deuteronomistic historian is in the book of Kings. So when we finished through chapter 15 last week of 2 Kings. Well, it was in it was in chapter 14, verses 23 to 29 that dealt with the reign of Jeroboam II of Israel. And then in chapter 15, verses 1 through 7, it dealt with the reign of King Uzziah of Judah. And it is during the reigns of these two kings, one of Jeroboam II of the north, one Uzziah/Azariah of the south, that the prophecies of the prophet Amos are contemporary with. Okay, now let's open up Amos. I have not yet decided, by the way, if I'm going to spend 1 week on Amos or 2. I'm not sure. We'll see. Let's see how wordy. Let's see how wordy I get. Okay, so if we open up the book of Amos, here we have it. Chapter 1, verse 1. The words of Amos, who was among the shepherds of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of King Uzziah of Judah and in the days of King Jeroboam, son of Joash of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. I'm not going to get into when's the earthquake because we're not 100% sure exactly when that was. But he gives us a definite frame of reference. So when we read what happened during the reign of Jeroboam II and the reign of Uzziah of Judah, this gives us an overall picture of the context in which he's preaching. So notice he calls himself being among the shepherds. This isn't like the word for shepherds isn't like a sheep, like somebody out there with the stick and and doing that. This is the word that denotes somebody who's like a breeder of them or a herder or owner of large flocks. He is kind of a businessman, if you will, a rancher. Think of him as a big, kind of a big deal, kind of like Hoss Cartwright. Hoss Cartwright? Ben Cartwright, wasn't it, on the Bonanza? Anyway, our Amos was a man not of the clergy. He was a man of the people. He was a man who was a businessman in the agricultural realm and of bringing of animals. Okay, we're going to have a little bit more about him later, but notice it says he's from Tekoa. Tekoa is about 8 miles south of Jerusalem. So what does that mean about him? Well, he's from the southern kingdom, and he's going to have a lot to say about more than just what's going on in Judah during this time. By the way, we're talking about the time like in the 750-ish range. I don't need to get too technical here because it's your brain will go. We don't want that. Nobody wants that, right? Verse 2, Amos chapter 1, verse 2. And he said, "The Lord roars from Zion, and utters his voice from Jerusalem. The pastures of the shepherds wither, and the top of Carmel dries up." Bum, bum, bum. Whoa. You got to have a lot of cojones to be able to put that out there and say, what's going on. Mount Carmel is that mountain that's famous for possibly, where the Transfiguration happened, but it's of the northern kingdom. It's something in the northern kingdom. Utters his voice from Jerusalem indicates that it's from Zion. So it's like he carries this southern perspective that that is the residing place of the Lord, okay? And one of the things that we've got to keep in mind is this. The prophets were not, remember the prophecies of Elijah and Elisha that we had in the books of the Kings? Well, the time for that where they are like coming to the king, even David had his own prophet, right, that would come to the king. These aren't that kind, okay? These aren't the kind that were in, like in the that interacted with the king so much, at least not to the point that our Deuteronomistic historian in Kings wants to point out, right? Because we don't hear anything about Amos in the book of 2 Kings, right? Right, we don't. The prophets were acting as a reality check to what the kings were doing. Okay, the reign of Jeroboam, the northern kingdom. What if we think Jeroboam II? And if you've been watching my Bible study Wednesday, you know I mentioned this. But you don't get a whole lot of it from the book of 2 Kings. But the reality is that there was a huge amount of prosperity going on in the northern kingdom during the time of Jeroboam II, although he only gets a few verses. Remember, our Deuteronomistic historian in 2 Kings has a bone to pick about the high places and the worship of syncretistic worship of Yahwism with Baalism and such. So he has a different agenda, if you will, than Amos does. Amos is kind of a little bit of a fundamentalist in the idea that he wants to remind people of the Mosaic covenant, the reality of the demands of the covenant, and where exactly are they going wrong. During the time of Jeroboam II, there was a lot of prosperity. The boundaries of the kingdom had basically been restored to the greatness of the days that we found with David and Solomon. And there was a lot of prosperity going on. A lot of this had to do with the fact that the threats from the north had subsided because they were having their own problems. Remember Aram, otherwise known as Syria? They were having problems. Even to the north of that, Assyria, before Assyria took over Syria, they were having problems. So it was a low point. And also with Egypt to the south, there wasn't a whole lot of clamoring. This thin little land bridge, which Israel basically is, this was a time when the powers outside that usually were putting pressure on Israel, they were a little bit they weren't like clanging their cymbals and ringing their horns, okay? It resulted in prosperity and, in the eyes of our prophet Amos, laxity with regard to the covenant. Okay, so, thus says the Lord. This is Amos 1:3. Oh my gosh. Chapter 1, verse 3. That's 9 minutes in. Okay. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Damascus and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because they have threshed Gilead with threshing sledges of iron. So I will send a fire on the house of Hazael, and it shall devour the strongholds of Benhadad. I will break the gate bars of Damascus and cut off the inhabitants from the valley of Avon, and the one who holds the scepter from Beth Eden, and the people of Aram shall go into exile to Kir, says the Lord. Okay, what is this about? Okay, chapter 1 is a lot of speeches against the nations that surround Israel. Now, Damascus was the name of the city that was the capital of Syria / Aram, okay? And we've heard of the names Hazael and Benhadad in 2 Kings. They're So Amos starts out his prophecies with words of judgment against the nations outside of Israel. So he's like easing it. He's going to lower the boom, okay, on Israel and Judah, but not before he gives each one of these historic enemies of Israel their comeuppance, okay? And so this is that thing of the for 3 transgressions of Damascus and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment. This is kind of a refrain, if you will, a poetic refrain, kind of like you have in a song where you have a chorus, right? And that's a way of introducing each one of them. The bottom line is that this is predicting the downfall of Aram, of Syria, to the north, which was already a little bit happening. But the judgment that Amos announces, notice they're not being held to, whether or not they're being one with Yahweh, because they weren't a part of the Yahwistic realm, right? So therefore, they are castigated, if you will, for their basic brutality, okay? Just basic brutality. And Amos is basically announcing to them that you're gonna get yours, all right? He moves on. Verse 6, thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Gaza and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because they carried into exile entire communities to hand them over to Edom. Okay, so what we're talking about here is, okay, so he's moved on from the talking about Aram or Syria of the north to the west coast. There were 5 cities of Philistia. One of them was Gaza, okay? And remember, these were historical enemies of Israel, okay? Another kind of an edict saying, you've been brutal, you're going to get yours too. So I will send a fire on the wall of Gaza, fire that shall devour its strongholds. I will cut off the inhabitants from Ashdod, that's one of the cities of Philistia, and the one who holds the scepter from Ashkelon, another one of the cities of Philistia. I will turn my hand against Ekron, another one of the cities of Philistia, and the remnant of the Philistines shall perish, says the Lord God. Boom. We know all about the historical problems that Israel had with Philistia. And so the fact that they're going to get theirs, see, this is what Amos is doing, the way the book is put together, it's constructed as like a building up of hope and stuff to make people get, yeah, they're getting theirs and they're getting theirs, yeah. But they're going to get theirs too. Pay attention. Verse 9, thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Tyre and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because they delivered entire communities over to Edom and did not remember the covenant of kinship. So I will send a fire on the wall of Tyre, fire that shall devour its strongholds. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, so Tyre was a Phoenician seaport city just north of Israel. Jesus visited there during his ministry, but it was basically a non-Israelite place, and they had some brutality against the people of Edom. Edom gets mentioned a lot here. Edom is that nation that was to the south of the Dead Sea. Historically, the descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother, that kind of thing. Okay, we don't need to get much into that, shall we? Not at this moment. Verse 11 in chapter, thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom, there we go, Edom, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because he pursued his brother with the sword and cast off all pity. He maintained his anger perpetually and kept his wrath forever. So I will send a fire on Teman, and it shall devour the strongholds of Bozrah. What is this talking about? Well, okay, Edom is spoken of as a person. Why? Because of what I just said. Edom historically was considered to be the descendants of Esau, Jacob's twin brother. Remember that? The one who was reddish in color. Okay, so there was a lot of enmity between Edom and Israel when they really didn't want. There shouldn't not have been, but there was. We see this reference to Teman. So I will send a fire on Teman. That's a synonym for Edom. Bozrah is another city that's in Edom. A lot of times in poetic parallelism, instead of saying the same thing twice using the same words, what they'll do is they'll just change it up using different words that are basically mean the same thing. Okay, but bottom line, Edom is going to get theirs too. All right. We can go to, there are other prophecies that are other prophets, especially of the minor prophets, of which Amos is one, who have that's what the whole thing is about against Edom, because there was a lot of enmity, if you will, with them. Okay, verses 13 and more, against Ammon. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of the Ammonites, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment. Okay, the Ammonites this was a territory just to the Transjordanian side. So if you're looking at the Transjordanian side, way south on the southern tip, you got Edom. And then coming up like immediately to the east of the Dead Sea, you've got Moab. And then a little bit farther north, this is where you find the Ammonites. I've got a problem with my leg joint. It's like giving me pain every time I move it. So if you're wondering why I flinch, that's what's going on here. And then north of that, we have Gilead. Okay, so Gilead was actually part of Israel, but on the Transjordanian side. So here we go, the Ammonites, because they have ripped open pregnant women in Gilead. This was actually one of those standard things of warfare, and they're getting, it's not considered to be a good thing, but it is a standard dominating kind of practice when you were to sack a city and you're really showing, hey, we really mean business here. You really mean business if you're taking the pregnant women and ripping them off. It's just disgusting, isn't it? It's horrible, but this is the way life was back then, especially warfare. It was this isn't the only time we have it referred to. Because they have ripped open pregnant women in order to enlarge their territory. So apparently they were doing aggressions toward Gilead. Remember, Gilead was actually Israelite, okay, even though it was on the Transjordanian side. So I will kindle a fire against the wall of Rabbah. That was a city in Ammon. Fire that shall devour its strongholds with shouting on the day of battle, with a storm on the day of the whirlwind. Then their king shall go into exile, he and his officials together, says the Lord. Bum, bum, bum. So at the end of chapter 1, we've got 1, 2, 3, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 oracles against foreign countries around there. Let us continue. Chapter 2. Against Moab, Israel's neighbor and the rival to the southeast of Jordan. I mentioned that right there to the, like if you look at the Dead Sea, they're immediately to the right. Okay. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Moab and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because he burned to lime the bones of the king of Edom. All this is just the atrocities of the nations around. Okay? So I will send a fire on Moab, and it shall devour the strongholds of Kerioth, and Moab shall die amid uproar, amid shouting and the sound of the trumpet. I will cut off the ruler from its midst, and I will kill all its officials with him, says the Lord. Wow. So, what the structure of the book is doing is building up with the people the idea that, yes, all of our enemies are going to get what they have coming to them. Well, things are going to change here. Look at this. verse 4 of chapter 2. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Judah and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because they have rejected the law of the Lord and have not kept his statutes. But they have been led astray by the same lies after which their ancestors walked. So I will send a fire on Judah, and it shall devour the strongholds of Jerusalem. This is about 150 years or so before Judah actually gets their exile. The idea that that he's given it to, he's treating them almost at, remember, this is his home area, Judah. He's from Tekoa, remember? Many scholars feel that this might be something that was added later because it sounds like not in the realm of where he was going, because he was really getting at the northern kingdom and the fact that they're about to go into exile. If you've been with me in our study of 2 Kings, the first exile of the northern kingdom has already happened, not the final one, but the beginning of it. So it is going to result in that. Amos is predicting that. Verse 6, thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, okay, now he gets to the northern kingdom, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth and push the afflicted out of the way, father and son go into the same girl, so that my holy name is profaned. They lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge, and in the house of their God they drink wine bought with fines they imposed. What is he talking about here? Well, the syncretistic tendencies of the northern kingdom drew Baal cult practices into the worship of Yahweh, which meant that there was temple prostitution that was being promulgated. It was being done. This is what we're talking about there. Remember, this was a time of great prosperity in Israel. So when our prophet is talking about, he's like, okay, maybe there is a lot of prosperity going on, and we're kind of the cock of the walk right now, but guess what? We have so not been being who we're supposed to be being. We're gonna pay for this. So don't you dare think that this prosperity is going to last, because we have done it, built it on the backs of the poor, kind of a thing. That's what he basically said, right? I think he's going to go on some more about that. Okay, here we go. Verse 9, yet I destroyed the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of cedars, and who was as strong as oaks. I destroyed his fruit from above, and his roots beneath. Also, I brought you up out of the land of Egypt, and led you 40 years in the wilderness to possess the land of the Amorite. Okay, so the reference here, of course, is to the Exodus, the 40 years in the wilderness time, right? And then to entrance into the promised land. According to the northern tradition didn't talk about it as the land of the Canaanites. It talked about it as the land of the Amorites. Okay, that's just an ancient name, but just like the northern traditions called Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, they also called the Canaanites the Amorites. Just one of those things. Verse 11, and I raised up some of your children to be prophets, and some of your youths to be Nazarites. Is it not indeed so, O people of Israel, says the Lord? You made the what's a Nazarite? The Nazarites, they were a people that taken vows. A lot of times the vows were before they even born. A vow, usually the mother, many times the mother would make the vow, and Samsonite was a Nazarite. They weren't supposed to ever cut their hair or drink strong drink. And so to get a Nazarite, somebody who'd taken this vow, to go against it was considered to be a bad thing. And look what you got. Verse 12. But you made the Nazarites drink wine and commanded the prophets, saying, you shall not prophesy. So I will press you down in your place, just as a cart presses down what it is full of sheaves. It's a very very descriptive poetically. It's a good. Flight, verse 14 of chapter 2 of Amos. Flight shall perish from the swift, and the strong shall not retain their strength, nor shall the mighty save their lives. Those who handle the bow shall not stand, and those who are swift of foot shall not save themselves, nor shall those who ride horses save their lives. And those who are stout of heart among the mighty shall flee away naked in that day, says the Lord. What we are getting here in verses 13 to 16 is the effects of the earthquake. The earthquake that comes, remember that earthquake we were told about in chapter 1, verse 1, he's kind of interpreting it as a manifestation of God's judgment of being unfaithful to both Yahwistic worship and unfaithful to the poor, and not keeping the covenant of how it's supposed to make sure that everybody gets theirs. So in all of this, the hammer has come down, if you will, on Israel. It has come down, and it's gone boom, boom, boom. I think this is where I'm going to stop for today, because I think we got to take this in small bits. So that was chapters 1 and 2 of Amos. We're going to continue with Amos next week, but we want to get that in the end, Amos is going to turn to a word of hope, but he's introducing the idea that we are responsible for our we're responsible for our experiences of our circumstances. He's interpreting the circumstances as, yeah, our God is the God of history, so therefore don't think of yourself as victims. If you're experiencing misery, you know what? Guess what? You had it coming to you. In these first 2 chapters, he built them up by saying, oh, all of your enemies are going to get theirs. And then he's saying, oh, and by the way, you also have been an enemy of God by your behavior. So Israel has been judged according to their faithfulness to Yahweh. The nations weren't judged according to their faithfulness to Yahweh. Israel was, because that was their thing, okay? That was where they were, that's who they were supposed to be in the world, was Yahweh's special possession, but yet not even they have kept that. So that's it for this week for Bible Study Wednesday. We're going to continue with Amos next week. There are 9 total chapters to Amos. You know what? I might just end up going through all 9 chapters. Who knows? But I don't know how many weeks I'm going to spend on it. It just depends. So I hope you find this interesting. I do encourage you to do some reading on this time of Israel if you get interested in it. It is very telling because of the fact that it does introduce the idea that in a nation, you know what? Just because the economy is good, okay, good, even great. We know these times, right? We know these times of feeling like that you think, oh, things are good, things are good, things are good. Guess what? They might not always be good. Just because we're well off financially, and we're secure and feeling good, you know what? Maybe we need to give another look at how faithful are we truly being. is this being done at the expense of? It invites us to be more introspective. That's what Amos is doing. He's inviting us to be more introspective. If we are experiencing comfort, yeah, I can say, yeah, sure I am. Affluence, I don't know about affluence, but definitely like, things are pretty good right now. Well, there's never a bad time to look inside yourself and to do a little self-inventory. And I believe that's what Amos is getting at in his prophecies. Okay, there you have it. We're gonna pick up with that in chapter 3 next week. So until then, shalom.